Okay, so we are all good to go. So, hi everybody, thanks for joining in and watching us. Want to introduce you all to Tanya Heaslip. So, thanks so much, Tanya, for joining us. Tanya was, oh, sorry, I lost where it go. So Tanya was raised on an isolated cattle station north of Alice Springs during the 1960s and 70s. Tanya learnt about the outside world through the correspondence school and school of the year. She spent many hours dreaming of the overseas lands depicted in her childhood stories. When she was 12 years old, she was sent 1,600 kilometres away from her outback home to a boarding school, a traumatic and life changing experience. From there, she became a lawyer. She never stopped dreaming, however, which led her to the Czech Republic to teach English in 1984, and 4 years, which was 4 years after the Berlin Wall fell. Tanya has published Alice to Prague in 2019, An Alice Girl in 2020, and Beyond Alice in 2021, which is her third memoir. And hopefully I can show it all right. I've just finished reading Beyond Alice, and I was saying to Tanya how much I enjoyed reading it. Like, it's something that I've never experienced myself. So it was good to read someone else's experience and read about a location. I've visited Alice Springs once, but yeah, read about a location I didn't know very much about, which was really good. And want to just let people know as well that thanks to Ellen and Unwin, if you ask a question during the Facebook Live, you'll have a chance to win a copy of Beyond Alice. So please just type any questions you have for Tanya in the comments and I'll read them out. So thanks again for joining us. Just wondering, do you want to start off by telling us a little bit more about your books?
Yes, thank you, Jackie. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me and a big welcome to all your viewers. Hopefully you've got quite a crowd out there tonight, and if you're in lockdown, my sympathies. Thank goodness we've got books to get us through these kinds of times. I'd love to tell you about my book. Shall I tell you about all three briefly?
Yeah,
Or
that
just
would
the
be
latest?
great. Yep.
All right. So I've written three books. I can't hold them all up at once, or they'll fall. So I'll go through them briefly, one after another. So this this is the first book, Alice to Prague, and as Jackie said, that was published in 2019, and that chronicles my journey to the Czech Republic 4 years after the Berlin Wall fell, and all the adventures I had there teaching English to the Minister of Justice, judges of the High Court, and so forth, because I was a lawyer, but I had no teaching qualifications, so I combined them and just ended up in these extraordinary roles, having extraordinary adventures. And this book is woven through with growing up here in Central Australia on our outback cattle station, and the dreaming that I did on the back of a horse about going to these places, mountains with snow on top and meadows strewn with daffodils, and these caves and smuggler holes on the coast, things I could only imagine from isolated outback Central Australia in the 1960s. So when I finally got to go, I was incredibly lucky. I was in England when the Berlin Wall fell, and I got to Berlin and I saw the wall fall with my own eyes, and it absolutely changed my life. And I thought, I've got to get over the other side of that wall. Now I can. So that is the long and the short of how Alice to Prague was born. And when I got back to Australia, I really, really wanted to tell the story of the Czechs, but I was working full time, and it took me a long time. It took 15 years to write this and find a publisher, 30 rejections. So it was
Really?
not for the faint-hearted. But you can see it's upside down. So this is the beautiful Trofina Gorge, which is in the eastern McDonald's, not far from Alice Springs, and upside down is Staroměstské náměstí, which means the Old Town Square in Prague. So I published that, and then people said to me, well, look, you think that Central Europe is very exotic and interesting, but for most Australians, Central Australia is just as exotic and interesting. And so why don't you tell your story about growing up in Central Australia? Because there's nothing like it anymore. So this book was born, which had to be written in very short order. That's me on the front cover, aged 8, and that's how I lived in a hat, long plaits, or plaits, it was all plaited into one there, jeans and boots. And this story in Alice Girl is those early years of us, my parents coming here as pioneers, really, to Central Australia in the 60s and growing up doing correspondence school and School of the Air for my lessons, and all the adventures we had then on horseback, living in the stock camp, mustering cattle and so forth. So that book was born from that, and this also has photographs of our life back then and doing School of the Air on our little two-way radios. So I finished that book and it went up to age 12, which is when I had to go to boarding school, because back then in the 60s and early 70s, all bush kids in the Territory, particularly Northern Territory, got sent away to boarding school because we had no secondary school equivalents here. And so the government even paid a subsidy to parents to send their children away. So I knew it was inevitable. I knew it was coming. But I led this incredibly blissful life up until age 12 and ended it just knowing that I had to leave. And so when I finished that last year, lots of people said to me, well, we want to know what happens next. We want to know how was boarding school and how did that go. So that's led me to book 3, which came out this year, Beyond Alice, and that's me, age 16, on a horse. And you probably can't see really, but that's a saddlebag, and my beautiful little horse, hat. That was our standard gear, boots, jeans, and this is the upside down picture, very much like Alice to Prague, of my boarding school. If I turn it up that way, you can see dun 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 the prison, which is what it was. And on the back, I don't know if you can see that, but that's a picture of little 12-year-old me in this utterly ridiculously hideous uniform, maroon, and stockings and shoes. So this book's all about those coming of age teenage years, and interspersed with it are all the holiday adventures of coming home, the stock camp drafts, horse races, gymkhanas. So that's an overview of all 3 books and how they're linked. So they all stand alone, but in essence they're a trilogy because they cover these years of my life, and this one ends with me dreaming, and it's a full circle which takes me back to Prague.
Yeah. Well, thanks for those summaries of your books. I think now that I've read Beyond Alice, I think I'll need to read The Alice Girl next, it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah. Well, chronologically, this is the first in the series. It just happened to be written second, and the first one, Alice to Prague, chronologically is the third. So because they're standalone, you can read them in any order. But I'd recommend that one next, unless you're completely obsessed about travel and you're missing it terribly, in which case you can do some armchair travel through this book.
Yeah. So when you were growing up and as a young child, did you think that you would be writing about your life?
I do write about this a bit in An Alice Girl, the growing up years. Yeah, I always wanted to write, and I used to scribble out stories as part of my correspondence school lessons. And I used to make up these stories because Mum would go into town once a month to get supplies because it was a very long trip, and she'd go to the School of the Air on the way home and bring a box of library books from the School of the Air, and I would have this box for a month and I'd dive into it and immerse myself in these other worlds. So I just started writing about these other worlds, and soon I had stories about that kids galloping across fields, riding down to the coast to chase, the smugglers on the ships. And then I had these English children on bicycles cycling across the desert chasing cattle. I completely intertwined these two worlds, one that was real and one in my imagination, and thought it was completely normal to do that.
Yeah.
And I started sneaking into my father's office and using his typewriter because I thought I could get faster at getting out these stories if I had a typewriter. And in the end, I drove him mad. So for my 10th birthday, I received the best present I've ever had since or before then, and that was a little orange typewriter, and I had this one finger and I'd bash out my stories. So it was just absolutely what I always wanted to do.
And had you kept a diary yourself?
I kept lots of diaries. When I was a kid, I didn't keep detailed diaries. I had for some years, but they'd say things like went to the stock camp for 3 weeks. That was it. But it was very easy remembering my life back then because all the friends and family from that time had very strong memories. So we pulled all our memories, and it was, and my siblings, of course, were able to set me straight on all sorts of things. The Going back to the first one, Alice to Prague, I had very detailed diaries that I kept when I was in Prague. And I also sent letters home that my mother kept. So between the diaries and the letters, I had this really detailed story almost written actually of the characters I'd met and the places I went and the politics I experienced. So that actually, factually was quite easy to pull together. And then the last one, I wrote in collaboration with a number of my boarding school colleagues who had kept their own diaries and had very good memories. And so I'd write stuff and then I'd email it to them, and they'd read it and they'd say, no, you've got the wrong date, or this happened there, and do you remember this? So between us all triggered each other's memories. So I think for all of them, certainly diaries, but collaborations
With
being
others,
invaluable for me.
yeah. No, that's great. And we've got quite a few people watching and some questions coming through, which is really great. I really like Sue's question. Sue is saying, is it difficult to write your life story in such a way that others want to read it?
Thank you, Sue. That's a very good story. Well, here's the interesting thing. I actually didn't set out to write memoir or to write my own stories, because when I was a kid, everything I created was fiction. But what happened when I came back from Prague was that I was just overwhelmed by the experiences and really compelled to tell the stories of the Czechs. Because on my return, and this was 96, I found so many people didn't know anything about the Czechs, and we didn't have mobile phones back then, and the internet was just really kicking off. So I started writing their story, and the feedback I got from publishers was, that's all very interesting, but you were there. We want to know your story with it. And so in the end, I wove my story into it. And then when it had to go out into the world, Sue, you're quite right, I was pretty nervous. But of course, that then led to people saying, well, tell us about your growing up years. And then that led to boarding school. So even though I didn't set out to write memoirs, and that's what happened, I think the way that I did it was, once I started telling the stories, it was almost as though I was out of my body telling the stories of a child who I knew really well. So I could see myself in these experiences, but it was almost like I was describing somebody else.
Yeah.
And I think that I've spoken to other people who've written memoirs, and they find that they do that. And once it's on the page, it's almost somebody else's story, which is very interesting.
That
feel
isn't.
quite
Yeah,
detached
that's
from it.
interesting. Yeah.
So thank you, Sue. It's a strange thing when people actually then sort of feel like they know you, but it's also very humbling and gratifying.
Yeah. Mary wonders what inspires your writing.
Thank you, Mary. I think the experiences that I've had in my life have really inspired me to get them down. I found that I love telling these stories. So, telling the stories of my time in the Czech Republic was inspired entirely by being there. The culture, the music, the history, the kindness of the people that I met, and a love affair, of course. That all those factors combined really inspired me to tell those wonderful insights of another culture that I would never have got if I hadn't been there and I'd lived within the Czech community. So that definitely inspired me. Writing about my childhood, it feels very close to me because our cattle station is still there, and my brother and mother still live there. My childhood horse sadly has died, but the horse yards and the cattle yards and our whole life as it was as a child is still there. So when I'm there, I am transported in a second and inspired by that. And of course, boarding school, well, that didn't take long to remember once I started collaborating with other girls.
Yeah, yeah. Kelly has said something that I was thinking as well. So, you mentioned earlier that it took you 15 years, was it, to write your first book?
Yes, to
That's
write Alice to Prague.
Yeah, so that's a lot of dedication, Kelly says. How did you go about that? Like, how did you keep going? And you said you had 30 rejections. How did you motivate yourself to keep going?
Thank you, Kelly. That is a really good question. I have a very kind, supportive, stoic husband. That certainly, he certainly helped get me through it. But here's the interesting thing. This story about Prague, when I came back and I said that I felt compelled to tell it, this might sound strange, but this story had a life of its own. It was as though the story itself demanded to be told. So every time I wrote something and it was rejected, I'd put it in the metaphorical bottom drawer, I'd hide in the cupboard, I'd weep, I'm a failure, and why have I wasted my time, and nobody wants to read this. And I would have 2 or 3 days where I couldn't go out of the house. And then it's like tap, 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 tap. It was though the story then came back and started tapping me and going, righto, that's enough self-pity. Okay, back to work, back to work. So this story, the story is what got me through those 15 years, because I would have given up so many times, but it lived inside me, and it was so real, and it was a compulsion. And my wonderful husband realised that, and he said, you can't give up. But I had a lot of twists and turns. I had to find many different mentors and writing groups, and it took me a long time to find my own voice and the stride for it. But really, it was the story that kept me going.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Kelly also says she loves how your covers have such meaning. And she's wondering if any of it was your design or ideas.
Well, a bit of both. So Alice to Prague was entirely this wonderful woman called Nadia, who just happens to have a Czech name, which I thought was marvellous, who freelances to Allen and Unwin. So it was her design and idea. And I loved it, but I was very involved, and we went backwards and forwards with lots and lots of different photos. But she had the idea. Then an Alice girl, this was really hard to put together, and this was my photo. And we worked on the background. So yes, I had quite a bit to do with that one. And it was the same, each time the same wonderful designer. And this was, well, they're both my photographs, and then the style, the designer thought, okay, well, we'll make the same sort of font and same upside downside, because this is the girl who's been catapulted out of one world into another. So they were her ideas, but I did work very closely with her and felt so lucky.
Yeah, no, they are really stunning, and I like how they've used like your photos as well in them as well.
Yes, yes.
And I think Belinda's asking what a lot of us are thinking. Are you adding to your story?
Thank you, Belinda. I would love to. I Again, it's very strange because I didn't set out to write memoir, and I certainly didn't set out to write my own story. But it is interesting how these stories keep coming to me, and So there are a number of Czech people who fled communism and landed in Australia who I've met. And I've listened to many of their stories, and some of them I've written down. And I've, again, got this real compulsion to write their stories. And perhaps it'll be interwoven with my time later in the Czech Republic, where I went back and I met my husband, not there, but in London on my way home. So it might end up being interwoven because of that need to give some personal connection to it. But my sense of it, it's all about home. Where do you belong? If you are dispossessed and you cannot go home, how do you make a new home? And then how do you live with that? And then if, as in the case of the Czechs, communism fell and they were safe to go home, how do you then reconcile this new life you've created with the life that is in your heart, because that's your adolescent or your formative years home? And it's a really vexed question that refugees everywhere face, and the Czech people I've known have handled it amazingly well, and some have worked out how to live here and make this their home, but acknowledge that Prague will always be their sole home. Others, however, live in this constant state of being torn, and these people are in their 70s. So it really is a vexed question, and so I feel, again, this sense of I want to tell their stories, and I'm not quite sure exactly the form, but that's my thinking. So thanks, Belinda, for asking.
Yeah, no, that sounded interesting too. Mary wonders what research your books involve. So I know you spoke about talking to a lot of people. Is there any other research that you do as well?
Well, certainly for Alice to Prague, I had to do a lot of research to make sure the factual components were accurate. So, I mean, I did use Wikipedia a lot, for better or worse, and I read a lot of articles and found books that to make sure that I had the dates correct of all the major events. So, for example, when the Austro-Hungarian Empire fell, and then when the Nazis invaded, and when the Nazis were defeated, when communism arrived, when communism fell, that actually involved a lot of research, and a huge number of stories emerged during that, some of which I was able to weave in. My second book, An Alice Girl, there wasn't a lot of actual research because there's almost nothing that's been written anywhere about people living in the outback in the 60s and 70s, particularly from a child's perspective. I don't know of any other book about a child in Central Australia raised then that's been written, and it's written in my sort of child's voice. But I did a small amount of research because School of the Air plays an enormous role actually in all of the books. And so I knew the history, but I went back and did research about this amazing woman, Adelaide Mietsky, who was just this gung-ho pioneer ahead of her time, who in her 60s went out into the bush. This was in the 1940s, and saw how terrified children were. And she went out with John Flynn on his missions because her sort of hat was education. And she came back and she saw John Flynn using the Royal Flying Doctor Service for medical purposes, and she thought, well, if people can call up on a two-way radio to seek medical advice, why can't children call up to a teacher and be taught? So that was a very interesting journey back into looking at what she went through as a single woman back there, and it was her idea and her passion.
So what year was that? What year was that started?
Oh, sorry, what was that?
What year
Jackie?
was that started? Do you know?
1951.
Okay, yeah.
1951, and it had an international reception. It was covered by the press internationally, and they called it the largest schoolroom in the world because it's 1.3 square million kilometres in radius for this Alice Street, and there were about 30 or 40 of us when I was there. So so she did all that work during the 40s and then really pushed to get School of the Air up. So 1951 was the big celebration, and it began. So that was very interesting. And then for boarding school, no, there was a little bit of research about how the school began, but again, it was written from my teenage perspective at that time. So that probably had the least of the external research, but the majority of the collaboration with other girls.
Yeah, okay. Sue's question, I think, so says, so sounds like your experience at boarding school was not that positive. And she says, why was that? But I think Sue needs to read your book to find out why that was. We don't.
I think so, Sue. I don't want to give too much
No,
away.
that's right. So, yeah, it does go into a lot of detail on the reasons why. So, yeah, recommend so that you read the book. Belinda says, what is your favourite place around Alice to visit?
Oh, have you been, Belinda? Can Belinda is
I
she
don't
able
know if
to?
Belinda said she has been or not. She
I
might
can
let us
answer
know.
anyway
Yeah,
while she's.
Belinda. I'm sure Belinda will let us know.
Yeah. So there are so many beautiful places, but Alice Springs sits within the McDonnell Ranges that run east to west. So imagine you've got this desert that's flat, and then you've got these incredible mountain ranges that have been created over the millennia by major geological upheavals, and that these magnificent ranges. So to the west, there are many beautiful gorges, and perhaps Ormiston Gorge and Glen Helen are the most beautiful. And then to the east, probably Nadalia Gorge and Trofina Gorge, which is here,
Okay.
and Ross River. Any of these gorges they're like stepping back in time, and of course there's no internet reception out there, just these enormous big blue skies and red earth and red rocks. It's very, very magical, and you do feel like you step back in time.
Yeah. Belinda says no, she hasn't visited there, but her daughter recently visited.
Okay.
But yeah,
Well, I hope
I'd
that
have to
yours
say
is.
myself, I've been there once, probably 15 years ago, I'd say. And yeah, like you said, like the redness was something that I really was amazed at how, like, you know that it's going to be, but when you actually see it.
It's hard. Well, especially with the background of New Zealand,
Yeah,
Jackie.
after the greenness of, yeah.
This is very, very red.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
the other really lovely thing that you can do in Alice Springs is visit School of the Air and the Royal Flying Doctor Service, and you can see live classes held today, which is fascinating because time's moved on. I had a little radio and a microphone that I spoke on, but now kids all around the bush have got access to satellite internet connections, and so they have laptops and they can see their teacher and they can see their classmates, which we never could do. We could hear the voices and we'd paint faces around the voices of our teacher and the children and imagine what they were like. But now kids can actually see each other and their teachers. So the School of the Air is wonderful. It's got lots of memorabilia and stories of the past, and it shows how far it's come.
And did you actually ever get to meet any of those teachers that you had?
I did, because the School of the Air created what was called the Get Together. And once a year, all the bush kids came in. And of course, we were terrified because we were better than the children Adelaide Miefke had come across in the 40s, because at least we could hear teachers. But we were so shy. There was my sister and my two brothers and the horses and the cattle and the dogs. So we all clung to our mother's skirts. And then I well remember the first day I looked up at this very tall lady in this dress and high heels, and she looked down and she said, "Hello, Tanya. I'm so pleased to meet you." And in this voice, and I thought Mrs. Hodder, who was my teacher's name, sounded like the Queen. I didn't know what the Queen sounded like, but I imagined. And there she was in real life, and I knew in that moment that she was the Queen. And it was the most exciting moment. And so we met I just adored her, and we met the other kids, and very soon we all became fast friends because we all had this background in common of isolation and no other children but cattle, dogs, and work. So all those kids, we are still fast, firm friends today.
Yeah, that's a lovely story. Yeah. Kelly's saying, what would you say is the best thing about growing up in such a remote location?
Thank you, Kelly. Well, I think my imagination, it just, it was unfettered. Uh, we had, there was no television, there were no telephones. There was the two-way radio, where you could hear the Royal Flying Doctor Service sessions and people from stations calling in School of the Air. But that was it. So that and my books and my imagination. I had 12 years of the opportunity to be so creative. And that creativity is something now that I wish I could get back, because then what happened is, you go to school, and then I went to university and studied law and practiced law for many years. And law is the most, non-creative endeavor. And, it did terrible. You end up switching. I can't remember which side of you, but one side's creative, one side's analytical, but to do law, I had to switch to the analytical side and lost a huge amount of that imagination and creativity I had as a child, although writing is starting to bring it back. So that was just the best thing. And in retrospect, even more, I treasure it and think I was so lucky.
Yeah. Geraldine's wondering if you have any plans to write a pure fiction book.
Thanks, Geraldine. Yes, I do, because that's what I wrote as a kid. But it's taken me a little while to get there because I ended up down this memoir path. I have been so engrossed in those stories. I haven't really had time to stop and think, well, what would I write in fiction? But I do love a good thriller. So one option might be, this young female lawyer in the outback, and she, and there's some murder or there's some mystery, and she's involved, a bit like Kerry Greenwood's Friday Fisher, just an outback lawyer equivalent. So that, those kind of thoughts spring to mind, and also writing children's books set in the outback, because I loved so much as a kid writing about kids in the outback, and I've still got, in fact, there's a very shiny green cover back there and a brown cover, and they're my two favourite childhood books that I type with one finger on the DeLorean typewriter, and I keep them there to keep me inspired. So I think the answer is yes. Once I get through this next story around the Czech people who escaped and that whole question of home, I'm hoping the ideas will then start flowing.
Yeah. Kelly is wondering if one of your novels was easier to write than the others.
That is a very good question. I think, without question, Dear Old Alice to Prague was excruciatingly difficult to write. And I reckon that I probably wrote 2 million versions. So many rejections. So if I look at these, Beyond Alice took me back to the trauma of boarding school, and I had forgotten, well, not so much forgotten, I'd pushed it, out of mind, out of sight, as most kids who went to boarding school did. So writing this, especially in collaboration with other boarders, brought up lots of memories for us that were really difficult to process. And lots of people said, we don't remember. There are girls who just have blanks from those times.
They
don't want to remember. So actually, this one was quite difficult to write. Although at the end, one of my boarder friends said, "I wish we'd done this years ago. I would have saved myself hundreds of dollars in therapy." But this one, An Alice Girl, I think probably this was the easiest, because this was my childhood. It poured out, and I wrote it just as my father had died. So it was a very, very emotional and poignant time for me. And I think in writing this, I was a little girl and I was back in the safety of my family on the land, and it poured out, and it was very, very comforting as well. So probably an Alice girl, I'd say.
And Geraldine's question, you might have answered a little bit already, I think, but she said, did writing your books bring up any unexpected emotions for you?
Well, absolutely. I'm just thinking, gosh, Alice to Prague, if you read this, you will realise that I never ever wanted to leave Prague. And there are a whole lot of reasons I had to in the end, but I grieved the loss of Prague for a long time. And so writing this, and maybe it was also one of the reasons it took so long to write, was very, very emotional, remembering those times and those experiences. An Alice girl definitely brought up enormous amounts of emotion, because it was a time when I felt really safe again, and I was grieving the loss of my father. This, Beyond Alice, brought up all sorts of emotions, and interestingly it brought up a lot of rage, which I hadn't anticipated. But in the 70s there was no pastoral care at boarding school. I think this is partly answering maybe Mary's question, was it Mary? But it was a really, really tough time, and children had no rights and parents had no rights. So remembering this it brought up lots of emotion, but most of all anger at how the system was allowed to treat children, and then a lot of passion for what my mother went and did about that. So the fire burnt in her belly to make changes. So all different emotions in different ways for different reasons.
Yeah, it really surprised me when you said that your mother tried to ring, was it the headmistress, and she wouldn't even talk to her. That's pretty,
parents,
yeah.
They had no rights. The minute they handed us over to that school, they didn't realise it at the time, but they relinquished all rights.
Yeah.
And,
it's pretty amazing now looking back on it.
It's a very different, boarding schools today are very different, and thank goodness.
And Kelly said she'd love to see a female outback thriller.
Really? Excellent. Thank you, Kelly. Okay,
So
I'll bear that in mind.
hope we see one soon.
Well, that would be fantastic. I realised that in doing this, I really like collaboration, which I didn't realise until I'd started writing. So I might have to have a bit of a put up on my Facebook page or website and just seek ideas from people, and anyone who wants to come on the writing journey. So Kelly, bear that in mind. I might be tracking you down.
No, that's a great idea. I'm interested to know what you like to read yourself, and maybe if you've got any recommendations for us.
Yes. Well, I do love memoir and autobiographical works. I get great inspiration from reading about other people, especially if they've done tough things and they've survived. There's a really fantastic biography. It's called Of Ashes, I think, That Run to the Sea. Marie Monica, who's an amazing Aboriginal woman here in the Northern Territory and was one of the stolen generation, and that's her memoir, and it's very, very powerful. And she went on to do incredible things. I think because I've spent almost my whole adult life reading for work, the greatest pleasure I get, apart from memoir, are thrillers, because a thriller takes you into another place, and it's all about the whodunit. I don't like I don't like thrillers that are all about guts and gore, and like I can't read Patricia Cornwall, and I like ones that are not about the gore but the whodunit side. So I really love Friday Fisher, Kerry Greenwood's books. And I've just read this hilarious book. I don't know if you've heard of it, called The Thursday Murder Club.
Oh, yes, yeah. I listened to it on audio. Yeah.
Oh, it was
It is a good
funny.
one.
It was clever. There were nice layers of satire through it. It was the easiest read, but it was a river. It's like old people. It's the equivalent of Enid Blyton having all the kids outwitting the police, and here it was the old people in the old home doing the same. So I really loved that. And of course, then there are very serious writers like Helen Garner. I love anything that she writes, and I totally love Phosphorus. Is that how you pronounce it? Julia Baird's.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Phosphorus. I really loved that, and and one other, which is sort of part memoir, but it's got lots of really interesting themes, is 100 Years of Dirt by Rick Morton.
Okay, I haven't heard that one.
He grew up in outback Queensland, and the Mortons are notorious in outback legend for being very, very savage men. So he was the traumatised son of one of these, and he's gone on to become this extraordinary advocate for gay men in particular, but people generally say he's gay, and and he writes really firebrand journalism and about social issues. He's really gutsy, and he's a really easy read as well. So, and I've seen him speak at conferences. So, and of course, the Dictionary of Lost Words.
Oh, yes, I listened to that on audio recently as well. That was a great one. And I'm just looking up 100 Years of Dirt. I'll have to add that to my list of ones to read.
It's really, really impressive. He's just a magnetic writer. Once you start, you can't stop, and he weaves social issues into his own stories. Very, very clever.
Sounds good. And before we finish off, would you like to tell people how they can keep in touch with you?
Oh, yes, I'd love to. I would love anyone here who reads my books to touch base and connect. Obviously, you've realised by now I like connecting with people. So, yes, there are a couple of ways. So, Facebook, my Facebook page is Tanya Heaslip Author. And I think it's capital T, capital H, capital A, and it's all one word. But if you just put Tanya Heaslip Author in, it'll come up, and I'd love you to join that. My web page is tanyaheaslip.com, so www.tanyaheaslip.com. I should have had these in front of me to be prepared. And you can email me. So my email address is TJH, as in Tanya Janice Heaslip, and this is one word, Land Options, which is my business, .com.au. So Facebook, Messenger, webpage, which gives you the chance to send through to my email, or direct email. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to hear what you're reading, and anyone who's got good ideas for that fiction thriller, send them through.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, and been great chatting to you. Certainly looking forward to reading some more of your books and looking to see what more things you have coming out. Hopefully we get a chance to talk to you again.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I've loved this opportunity. I'm really grateful, and I'm thrilled for your listeners who've come here tonight and shared the moment with us. So thank you to everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to everyone who joined in. We had some really great questions. Thank you. So bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.